I am Sarah Dukevich. I'm also known as Saduki in the tech community. I am out of Northeast Ohio. People are familiar with Cleveland or Akron. I'm kind of in between those. I've been in tech for over 20 years. I've been a developer. I've been a database admin, report writer, tech support, web dev, you name it. I've pretty much fallen in all the roles. Nowadays, I'm a principal consultant at Stage 3 Talent. Basically, I do some web dev stuff, some cloud stuff between Azure and AWS. And then I also deal with writing curriculum for data science. Hence how I got down this notebook trail. Before we get too carried away, if you have any questions, I know there's a chat channel here in Teams. You can ask in Teams. Ask me when you have the question. I'd rather we capture the context right there than waiting till the end.
I'll monitor the chat and chime in if I see it.
Sounds like a plan. Cool. All right, well then, let's take this away. So we're going to talk about what is Project Jupyter and how it's related to Azure Notebooks. We're going to talk about Jupyter Notebooks. We're going to talk about what languages are supported. We're going to talk about where it can be run. The reason why I say that is because I actually have this running on my laptop as well. We're going to talk about how to use it. And then we're going to jump into the Azure Notebook part of it, which is what is Azure Notebooks and what languages are supported there and where can that be run. And then we'll talk about pandas. All right, let's take this away. Okay, so Project Jupyter. So Project Jupyter is the thing behind Jupyter Notebook, which is the thing behind Azure Notebook. So we're going to kind of decipher those layers as to who's who, what's what, and how do they all come together. So Project Jupyter is open source software and open standards. They do services for computing across dozens of programming languages. It's spun out of the IPython project in 2014. Let me see if I can, there we go. It is 100% open source software. So this is, you can see it, the project itself is on GitHub. It is free for all to use. It is released under a modified BSD license. So they do everything they can to make it there for the community. And the name Jupyter actually came from the 3 core languages that they supported, which are Julia, Python, and R. It's also a name that is a tribute to Galileo's notebooks for the Jupiter moons. And so you can see the Ju, the Pit, and then the together brought Jupyter for the name Project Jupyter. Now, Jupyter Notebooks, this is the primary thing that has come out of Project Jupyter. You'll hear Jupyter Notebooks or Jupyter Lab. Jupyter Lab is another interface to go on top of Jupyter Notebooks to kind of make it more friendly. But Jupyter Notebooks, what this allows us to do, this allows us to write code interactively. So this particular thing is a screenshot, but just to give you an idea of what it's doing is you can see what they call a code cell. So I can put in there, in this case, this is Python. And I'm doing some things where I'm reading from a CSV and getting the first 5 records. You can see that I'm getting, this is what I'm putting in code-wise, and this is the output. Now this is an interactive kind of tool, these Jupyter Notebooks. So it's nice because I can put all this code in, I can tell it to run this cell, and then that's when that output appears. And yes, that says Lego sets. I'll show you the Lego sets, I promise. How many of you are into Legos?
I missed it, but the kids liked it.
I see some hands. Yeah. Okay. So we use Jupyter Notebooks for many things. We use it for learning, for teaching, for presenting. So when I first encountered Jupyter Notebooks, I actually have to go back, way back to, there was a code mesh many years ago up in Sandusky. And there was a gentleman named Brian Sherwin. He's based out of Columbus, Ohio. He's one of my fellow Star Trek organizers. And he had done a talk about drops of Jupyter in her hair, with Jupyter in air quotes because he was talking about these things called Jupyter Notebooks. And so I went to his talk going, okay, let's see what this is. This is a play on the train song. I want to see what's going on. And I saw that this was this interactive where you type code and then you get output, and you type code and you get output. And I'm like, this is genius for learning a new language or brushing up on an older language, like for me, for getting back into Python. So I was like, okay, I'll use this. For learning Python, I used it for learning R. So there's a website called DataCamp, and they have two different tracks. They have an R programmer track and a Python programmer track. And in 2018, I was at the point where I had left my job and was looking for something to do, and figured I could get into the data science realm very easily if I had some kind of pieces of paper saying I went through programs. So I went through their Python programmer track and their R programmer track and used these Jupyter notebooks to take notes. So it was a great learning experience to have these interactive notebooks. For teaching, I can use it because I can show this interactivity, and I can have people go ahead and work with it as well. So I was able to show in the classroom. So after I went through those courses, I taught a client Python, and we used Jupyter Notebooks to go through the concepts of this is how the language works. And for presenting, you can do various math and language and other processing things, and then you can present your findings. So let's say you were writing a research thing and you want to find out something like ramen ratings as an example we'll take a look at here in a little bit. So there's a website called the Ramen Rater, and what they end up doing on the ramen rating site is he'll take a thing of ramen. I say a thing because it could be maybe a pack of ramen, a bowl of ramen. The data set will show a can. The data set also shows a bar. And you're like, a can of ramen, a bar of ramen? What? Does this impact the rating of a 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star, something along those lines? And it's interesting. We'll show what those are, but I can present those findings to you in a Jupyter notebook. Okay, Jupyter language support. So Jupyter, again, is the underlying notebook technology that Azure Notebooks is hosting. Jupyter in and of itself spun out of the IPython project, the interactive Python project. So Python is its first language. If you were to install Jupyter on your machine, you would end up getting Python by default. Let me show you what that looks like. So I'm going to start Anaconda. Oh, Anaconda. We're going to start Jupyter Notebook. I have Jupyter Notebook installed on my laptop. Oh, looks like it's already in use. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it, forget that. Since we've already got it open, I will bring it down this way. Oh, I did not want to do that. Okay. Let me bring that over here. Can you see the Jupyter window with localhost 8888?
Yes.
Okay, so this is running on my machine right now. And I have this, what they call an IPyNB file. The IPyNB file, this is the IPython notebook file. This is the extension you would use for any of the languages, be it Python or R or F#. And you can tell it's on my machine because it is localhost. I'm going to go ahead and tell it new. I'm going to create a new Python notebook. Now, this is the Jupyter interface. Running Jupyter Notebook brought this up. You'll notice I also have PowerShell on here. We'll talk about language support here in a little bit. I'm not going to show you the PowerShell stuff just because I have a feeling it's older. I haven't used it in a while. But this is what a Jupyter Notebook is like. So I can come in and I can say something like, okay, let's type 2 + 2 because language demos. Notice, can you guys read the in and the out just fine, or do I need to change the font size?
I can read it fine.
Yeah, we can find it. That's one of the nice things about the online presentations. It's right in front of you. It's not up on a screen. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you guys can see it because I don't know how it's going to project on the other side. So yeah, you can see 2 plus 2. This is the line number I'm on. This is the output for that line number. Now this is Python. How many of you have used Python before? Anybody?
I
See
have.
some hands going up. Cool. Awesome. So for those not familiar with Python, then I'm going to show you something to give you a little more insight on Python, the language, Python, the code, Python, the community. I'm going to type import this. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to run. I am pressing Shift Enter, just so you know what I'm pressing. I'm going to scroll so you guys can see this poem called The Zen of Python. So this talks about what is the Python, the language, the community, the code, the Pythonic way. And what was nice is I typed import this and just press enter, and it's interactive. It tells me right then and there what my output is. Now I know I'm using Python for this because it says over here on the right hand side that I'm using Python 3. I can also tell by this Python logo. So it gives me an idea of what I'm working with. We'll see more Jupyter functionality here in a little bit, but just to give you a quick glimpse of what we're working with. Okay. Now Jupyter operates on this concept called kernels. So these kernels are what give the language support for Jupyter. I'm going to go ahead and click on this link so you can see that they keep a list of all these various languages that they support. And if you come here to their list, you can see they have all sorts of things. Yes, even Fortran is on this list. You can do Scala, there's Julia, TypeScript,
Nice.
go ahead. All sorts of languages.
It'd be fun to do some Fortran. It's been a while.
The one I was looking for earlier today, I was curious to see if they had something like COBOL, but no COBOL yet. They have,
Rust on there?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah.
I would be curious to see because, yep, there's Rust.
Yeah.
Say Rust is fairly new enough. It should be on
Yep.
there, I would think. So, yeah, this is a good way to learn various languages out there by getting these kernels. And each of the kernels, they tell you the steps on how to get it installed. So that makes it a bit easier as well. The documentation in this community is great to see. And then to give you an idea of what another language looks like, I'll show you what my R notebook looks like. So as I had mentioned, I went through the R programmer track on DataCamp, and I saved all my output into various notebooks. Now the notebooks I saved it in were R Markdown files, which came with the R Studio. But I was able to copy that code here into these Azure notebooks. And you can see output if I were to go ahead and tell it to run the cell. If the kernel is going to cooperate, there it goes. Problem is sometimes the kernel gets a little bit flaky with me. So then I have to tell it to restart. But you can see I can go into these different cells and say, okay, here's the code, run the code, here's the output. Notice with the R one, you can see R here in the right corner. You can see the R logo next to the project name. And the R one actually doesn't have the out prompt, but the Python one does. So, and that'll vary from language to language as to how they implemented that. And we're fine leaving that. Okay. Any questions so far?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay. Let's go ahead and So another thing Jupyter has are extensions. And this allows us to do more than just what's in the box. We can do things like making our code pretty, collapsing code similar to what we would be used to in such as Visual Studio, auto-scrolling, building exercises, and auto-grading. Are any of you teachers, perhaps?
I actually teach high school, and I was wondering if I could use notebooks for that. That would be fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can use notebooks for that, and there are extensions out there that you can use to create exercises. That's the one that I've seen the most is exercise 2. And then there's another extension out there for auto grading. So you can set, here's the exercise, and by the way, here's the answer to check later. So I've been playing with the auto grading one because I'm trying to have tools available for helping me when it comes time to grade my data science stuff.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah. If you're dealing with math at all, there's text. LaTeX support is in there. Right now, the LaTeX support is by a library called MathJax, but there are also additional extensions to extend that even further. If you're into the development side of things and want to inspect your variables, if you want to do snippets, if you want to create a slideshow, perhaps, you could do that in Azure Notebooks as well. Tonight's presentation is not done in PowerPoint. This is an Azure Notebook that I'm presenting out of. So what you're seeing here, this is what they call the RISE extension. RISE, I can't remember what it stands for exactly, but it uses Reveal.js to help create the slides.
Very cool.
Yeah. Okay. Azure Notebooks.
There's one question.
Yes.
Craig asks, can you install Jupyter without Anaconda?
Can you install Jupyter without Anaconda? I don't know if you can install it with pip. Let's double check that on that. Yeah, you can use pip. You can do pip install Jupyter Lab or pip install Jupyter for that. I can bring that down here so you can see it. So yeah, you do not have to have Anaconda or Miniconda installed. You can use pip.
Yeah, I find Anaconda to be very bulky.
Anaconda is bulky. It's what, 3 gigabytes of bulkiness? It's ridiculously bulky. Miniconda is a bit smaller. It's a few hundred meg, but it has its payload. So yeah, you can do pip install. And then Azure Notebooks, you don't even have to install anything. You can just go to notebooks.azure.com. Now, why do I like Azure Notebooks? Azure Notebooks I like because, well, it's great for presentations like this one. It's good for things, like I said, learning new things and taking notes. We have the interactive languages and the data results. So let me show you some other things we have with Jupyter. I'll close Jupyter kernels. So this thing is called Rise Slideshow, and again, you can see I'm going up and down, I'm going left and right. The slides have all sorts of crazy navigation, and this is, again, part of Rise Slideshow. So if I go ahead and close this out a minute. I'm the magician, no magic tricks up my sleeve. I'm a horrible magician, I tell people. But you can see, this is what's going on under the covers. So as I mentioned with Jupyter, there's 2 concepts of cells to keep in mind. There's the code cell, and there's the markdown cell. There are other cells for other languages as well, but these are the primary ones to know. This one I can tell you is a markdown cell. How do I know? First of all, I don't have the in prompt, so I know it's not a code cell over here. Second is this drop down here. whatever your cell is that's selected, it will change. I could also come here and say I want this to be a code cell. Doing that will not yield a good result, just so you can see. It might not actually come back right now because the kernel is unhappy. There we go. So does the RIDE slideshow have the export and import feature, for example, like PowerPoint? So I don't know that it will export to PowerPoint. I haven't played around with the export enough, but I can tell you Jupyter's got a lot of export options, Scott. So Scott was asking, does the RIDE slideshow have an import-export feature? I haven't seen the an import feature at all for anything, but exporting the notebook itself, you can. So I can download the slides as reveal.js slides. It's under the download as option under the file menu. But I don't know that there's an actual import feature either. Most of my slides, just so you can see, are either going to be pure Markdown, or occasionally I'm going to have to do something like with these guys with the images. I couldn't get the Markdown to size down the way I wanted to, and so then I used just straight HTML. Sure, you're welcome. And as you're seeing, this is what I edit. So if I go ahead and press Shift-Enter to process those, just tell them to run. Now the other downfall is the enter and exit RIDE slideshow doesn't have the press F5 to start the slide again. So I'm going to have to just tell it to enter and exit. And go back through to where we were. You could see that there's nothing, no tricks up my sleeve. This is just the RIDE slideshow here. Again, the text, it's Markdown. So there's a variety of languages we can work with. This one is Python. You can't see this when I'm in slide mode that I'm in Python, but when I'm not in slide mode, you can see that this is a Python notebook. Now what's nice, and if it will cooperate, is that I can actually type on the slides themselves. I don't know that this is going to work right now. This is the kernel being a little bit flakier than I'd like it to be today. We demonstrated the import this earlier in the Jupyter notebook as well. So if this had worked, it would have shown the ZennaPython. I think it might have broken the kernel earlier. So, okay. Note-taking in Jupyter notebooks. Again, I had mentioned that it supports LaTeX. So getting the formal math symbols and all of that. Barca, I believe you were the one who mentioned the high school?
Yes.
Yes. So if you're getting into things like calculus and derivative symbols and things like that, if you know what they are in LaTeX, you can use the syntax here. If you don't know it off the top of your head, don't panic. This link here for this Jupyter Notebook Markdown Cells document, I go to this often if I have to deal with those kind of LaTeX things.
Already started.
Cool.
Yeah. So that makes it nice. All right. Questions?
Too late.
Too late. Okay. So Azure Notebooks supports Python and R, and also supports F#. The reason why I call it Azure Notebooks and F# specifically is because this is the only one by default that includes F#. There are other online hosted notebooks that do support Python and R to varying degrees. Okay. And of course, there's the custom kernels as well. The Azure Notebook side of things is we need to have them support the kernels. and they don't have all the languages there just yet. Okay, presenting data. So we're going to take a look at Animal Crossing. Do any of you play Animal Crossing? Okay.
Yeah, that's a no.
That's a no. Okay, so Animal Crossing is a video game that's out there currently. It's a popular game among many folks that I've heard, where you have these animal characters and you can grow various vegetables and things in game. These vegetables have different prices that change throughout the day. And so you can see if I sell this, it's going to go how much. If I buy it, it's going to be how much. So think of it just like a stock market. Only in their world, they call it a stock market, STALK. There is Daisy May, which is a play on Fannie Mae. There's the Sow Jones market. Go figure.
Oh, wow. I never even played it because I thought it was dumb, but now it's sounding interesting.
It's from what I've told, it's very addicting. I haven't gotten into it, but I have enough friends who play it that I'm like, okay, fine, I'll include it in my presentation. And this allows me to talk about Kaggle a little bit as well. All right. So I want to bring up both the Animal Crossing database and Kaggle. And what's nice about using this as a presentation too is it's easy for me to click on these links. It doesn't take me away from the presentation, and I can come back. So there's this website called Kaggle. It's KAGGLE.com. And it is a wealth of knowledge for data. It's a wealth of knowledge for notebooks and finding other people who are taking data and parsing it about. So somebody created this Animal Crossing data set and put all of these things up there. And I was like, okay, Animal Crossing, I could use this information because, again, like I said, I have friends who play the game. And so I was able to just download all of these CSVs and take a look at what's going on. As I mentioned with Kaggle, they have data, they have notebooks. But the data sets that they offer, people will submit data sets of various types. And then it's on whoever's submitting the data to actually include things like what's the column? What kind of information can you expect? Some data sets are beautiful, like this one, they have useful names. If I were to click on items CSV, which is one I'm using here, there's descriptions, there's names, the field names are actually pretty legit. There's no weird spaces or anything funky like that. I could say things like, I want to see if it's a recipe. So it'll add, I can get a preview of what kind of values are in those columns. It's very helpful to have this kind of stuff, but then I could go ahead and download it. So what I ended up doing is I ended up playing around with it. And I'm going to go into, so my notebooks.azure.com, I have a special section for you all. It's called the Microsoft Cloud South Florida 2020-0604 for tonight's presentation with all of these files in here. How many of you are familiar with GitHub and cloning repositories?
Sure.
Me.
Yay! As long as you know what cloning repositories means, there's this clone button here. So I will include this link in your meetup so that you can actually access this, and you can come and you can clone this yourself. So you can have your own copy of this in your Azure Notebooks. It'll include the data, it'll include the images, it'll include everything that we present tonight.
Cool.
But if I come into Animal Crossing, you can see what I've got there. And I'm going to also show you my layout. So I have this data folder, and I put in there the items and the villagers. The others I didn't really do much work with. But I set up a Jupyter notebook to work with the Animal Crossing data, just to get a feel of, okay, what's in the data set? I typically will read in a CSV and then look at, in this case, I like to look at the first 10 items just to see what kind of data we're working with. One of the things I like to do when I'm looking at data is I like to call the info function off the data frame. So when I read in the data from a CSV file into a variable, it's reading it into what they call a data frame. So I'm using pandas, which is a Python data manipulation and presentation kind of package. Info will give me an idea of the columns and what kind of information's in those columns and how many things are not null. What's nice too is you can see that there's 4,565 entries. That's 4,565 rows. And so knowing that number, and then you can see that there's smaller numbers of like the recipe. There's going to be a lot of nulls in that column. So getting that kind of insight's helpful. I took a look at it before I created the slides to see, okay, what category in this data set has the most amount of items? And in order to do that, I just created a bar chart. And I said, okay, find all of the categories that are in this data set. Get all of the value counts. So how many unique values are in there? And then I wanted to sort them. And I only wanted the top 10. Then I wanted to just get the unique values for the currency to see if there was anything going on in there. Because like I said, I don't play the game itself. My friends do. But I was curious to see what kind of data I was working with. I checked here to see there's something called a currency called miles. So I wanted to learn more about the buy currency in miles. I have no idea what Nook Inc. is, but apparently you can buy stuff from them in miles. So, but the thing that had me going was that they have hats. How many of you watch Twitch? Any of you?
On occasion, yeah.
Okay. Do you happen to watch C# Fritz?
I do. I am a paying member of that
And you happen to notice that he wears hats often?
often.
Often. So this is a tribute to him and his hats. And so I went through and I was like, I want to see the hats that are out there. So I was like, give me the first 10 hats. And by the way, I want to see what this would look like on my slides. So can you just generate the HTML for me? And so I wrote a for loop to do that. And it did. And that turned into, let's see if it'll come up. It looked better on the Azure Notebook screen, but here are the hats. Okay, so you saw the Python, correct? With the for loop with the HTML generation?
We did.
Yes, yes.
Okay, so these are the hats that were created by that. And just so you can see, if I click on the slide, yes, I'm still in presentation mode with the slide, but I can actually go ahead and edit the slide while in presentation mode. So you can see nothing under the sleeves there. Those were the hats.
Neat.
And again, trying to understand the data a little bit more and what's in there. You can do various filtering as well. So you can do, like, if I want to only see certain columns, just put in the column name. So I have a double bracket. The double bracket basically indicates that, okay, the outer bracket says I need to pass in a collection of column names. The inner brackets are the collection of column names themselves. So that items, I just want to see the name category, or the name column, the category column, the buy value column, and the sell value column. And then I call on a tail. Tail will look at the last 5 records. If I want to see how many rows are in there, it's just a matter of calling len on the actual collection. Uh-oh. Is it possible to analyze XML and pandas? I don't know that you would be analyzing XML directly, Yitzhak. I think you would have to convert the XML into a data frame first. Let's do a quick, what I would do is I would check here for pandas, XML to data frame. And yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't go straight from XML, so you'll have to use another library to go XML probably to like a CSV or something easier for it to analyze. And then from that to pandas. And it looks like you can use the Python standard library to convert it as well. Does that help you, Yitzhak? Awesome. You know what, I'm going to paste this link into chat so that you have it as well. That's the Animal Crossing stuff. So yeah, here's, again, this is Kaggle. This is what I use for finding data for various presentations. This is one of many sources I use. Again, for data sets, just to get an idea of what's out there, data sets that you'll work with, be it in Azure Notebooks or Jupyter Notebooks, or even in Kaggle's notebooks, could be something small. It could be just a few rows, or it could be something like, let me show you my data set. So we have a data set that we've contributed to Kaggle. I say we because it's my husband and I. So we have temperature sensors throughout our house and humidity sensors throughout our house, trying to keep track of, like my office is at the other end of the house, so we want to see how warm or how cool it stays. And we raise various plants around here, so we want to try to keep track of the humidity and temperatures for them as well. And so we have a sensors data set that we've posted on Kaggle. Just to give you an idea, yes, it's 115 megabytes, but it's also 2.3 million records. This is from, I think it was 2016. Yeah, 2016 till April of 2020 is when I actually submitted this. So if you're looking for a data set that has a large amount of records to play with, this is one that I would recommend that I can tell you I know about. What's nice too about Kaggle is that they have these things. So they'll have, here's the data set. You can come to kernels and see who's working with it and what have they done with it. You can use these as examples to work with in Azure Notebooks as well. So what Kaggle calls kernels is similar to Azure Notebooks, is similar to Jupyter Notebooks. I'll show you what this looks like so you can get a feel for it. Tell it to edit. Any questions while this is loading?
I haven't been on Kaggle for a while. I'll have to revive my account.
It's definitely worth reviving because there's a lot more data coming up. And especially with the COVID-19 stuff, you're seeing more folks contribute to that as well. So you can see here, again, Kaggle's kernels are similar to Jupyter Notebooks with the code and the markdown cells and adding those cells. And if I go ahead and tell this to run, you'll start to see the output, the in and the out, very much similar to the Jupyter Notebook feel. When I say it's untidy data, it's kind of gross, but it's there. All right, let's go back to Azure Notebooks. This is where we started seeing that there was some trouble with the graphs, but that's okay. We have the graphs here in our Animal Crossing database as well. So the question that my friends came up to me was, okay, Sarah, they're like, can you come up with a graph? I'm like, well, of course I can come up with a graph. What do you want a graph of? They're like, can you show us, is there any relationship between the buy values and sell values for things? I was like, well, the buy value and sell value, let's take a look at this data set and see what I could find out. And so this is what I did, is I created a scatter plot. I took it by getting the data frame itself, and then I'm filtering it with a clause. I'm just saying, only give me the stuff that's in furniture, because this is the one that's the most populated. It has the most amount of data. I want to create a plot, so the dot plot. I specifically want a scatter plot of sell and buy, and then just give it a title. And this was the output it generated. So this goes to show how you can use Azure Notebooks to show the presentation of results. And then there's also the ramen ratings. Let me see if I can get that to come up. Are there any ramen fans in the audience?
Not so much.
Not so much. I see some hands going up.
Yeah.
That's a good thing. So the ramen ratings is another data set that I had mentioned earlier in the presentation. So there's a website called Ramen Rater. And the ramen ratings, what the guy does is he'll eat various things of ramen and then rate them based on his scale of 1 to 5 stars. Well, apparently his data set is not just ramen noodles. Looking through the data, we found out that he rates a can of ramen and a bar of ramen, which both seem very suspicious. So I was looking at the data set going, okay, what's going on with this? So then I was like, well, let's see how many records are in there. So this dot shape allows me to see the number of rows and the number of columns. And I wanted to see just what that structure looks like. So this is what I ended up doing, is I called the .info. I wanted to get a better feel for how many brands are in the database. There's 355 brands in this data set. And then I continued to go through to see, okay, what other things do we have in the data set? And so I looked to see, like, what are the most common brands? We've got Nissin is the highest, and he had a lot of Nissin. I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting to see. But some other things we noticed, I was working with this with some friends of mine who love to eat ramen. They love to go out for ramen as well. And so they're like, what can you find out about this stuff? What does this ramen rater guy have? I'm like, well, let's see how he does his ratings. Then I noticed that there was a style column. I'm like, what style? And so I learned that style shows cup, pack, tray, bowl, box, can, bar. And then, of course, not a number. And I'm looking at this going, okay, I understand a cup of ramen, a pack of ramen, like Maruchan, for example, tray, a bowl, but a box of ramen? Okay, and then I saw a can of ramen and I was very much thrown for a loop because I work with ramen noodles quite often. I've never seen it in a can. And then, of course, that bar of ramen. Longshan Black. I'll have to try that one, Ray. So Ray says Longshan Black is a good one to try. So I looked at the different values to see how he had this broken out. And I'm like, this is a long list of numbers. And it's been a long day, and they're not in any order. Let's present this in a more presentable way. And so I started looking at, okay, give me the top 10, 5 ratings. I'm going to scroll down to where I actually ended up sorting what I wanted to sort, which is right here. I wanted to see the relationship of stars to type. And what's nice about this is I could see that there's a line at can and there's a line at bar, which told me that there was one entry of each. I ended up looking it up to see what those were about. So Pringles did a chicken ramen flavor way back when, and apparently it's only a 3.5 star quality. I wouldn't recommend getting these chicken ramen flavored Pringles, but it sounds like they're gone right now anyhow. And then I looked up the bar because I was like, there's a bar of ramen and it's getting a 5.0 rating. What kind of ramen comes in a bar? And somebody actually did a chocolate bar with ramen. But what was nice about using Kaggle for this is I could actually create these visualizations to see this without having to sort through the numbers and try to make sense of them. Let's see, Azure Notebooks, I also brought in the ramen ratings data. So you will have this if you clone if you clone this repo. So I should be able to say ramen ratings, shape. Normally that would run, but I think right now that we're just having kernel issues.
It
And
is
this
a
is-
preview, right?
It is a public preview. So let's talk about that. I'm going to go ahead and end that. The last of my slides are my contact information. We can come back to that. So this is a public preview. So you can go to notebooks.azure.com, but there are some gotchas on what they recommend. Let me flip over to that. So this link here will explain what's going on with the public preview. So there are limitations to it being in public preview. They really recommend that you don't use it for production. There's no service level agreement, no SLA for it. Not recommended for production workloads. And then there are, of course, certain features that they have that's not really there yet. It's been in preview for quite a while. I've been using it a couple years now. So this could be one of those Microsoft projects that will have the preview stamp on it for a while. I'd be curious to see. This is not the only Microsoft project to be based off of Jupyter. There's one that just recently came out for Cosmos DB. There's one somewhere in the Azure AIML SQL world, because they can do that with SQL now. So you're seeing the Jupyter Notebook starting to appear in various other Azure tools besides Azure Notebooks. I don't know for sure how long this will stay in preview, but just be aware that it is in public preview.
Yeah, but Cosmos DB and Synapse, as well as AutoML, use Jupyter Notebooks.
Yeah. Yeah, it's growing, seeing where they're putting Jupyter Notebooks in the Microsoft realm. It's applicable, so it's not one of those that they're putting it in there just for the sake of having it. It actually makes sense where they're using it.
So how's this like for a long time in the machine learning in Azure? They had notebook type of areas. It's the same, except those are Jupyter. Those are Jupyter too, aren't they?
I'd say those are probably Jupyter as well.
Right.
Yeah, they're all Jupyter Notebooks. So.
And what's the difference with this? Like, why? What's the point? Just this outside of that machine learning?
Yeah,
console?
this was outside the machine learning console. This was outside the machine learning console before the machine learning console was around.
Okay.
So this one has been around for quite a while.
All right.
Yeah, this one doesn't seem to be tied specifically to like Azure ML or to one of the other Azure groups. It seems to be a general notebook hosting, similar to, so there's like Google Colab is one, Binder is another, Kaggle kernels is another. There's a couple others as well. I know Amazon has their own. But Azure, why Azure for me? It's a Microsoft product. I'm a Microsoft girl, always have been.
Oh,
So
yeah.
when I saw Jupyter, I was like, Jupyter in the Microsoft world? I gotta see this.
Yeah.
Another feature that I didn't show that I actually have time to show here is checkpointing. So what's nice too is that I could say something like, okay, does the type of ramen impact rating are ramen bars good? I could say something like that. Then I could be like, all right, let's save that. And I'd be like, no. I'm going to say our ramen bar is bad. Maybe I'm just not paying attention. I'm juggling multiple windows, type something, and then I'm like, no, I want to undo this. I can come up to File. I can come to Revert to Checkpoint. I can go, I want to go back to what I had at 653. Yes, I do want to revert that. I didn't mean to say bad. If I scroll back down, so it reverted my Jupyter notebook. That says our ramen bar is good. So checkpoints are nice because you have the spots of I could save along the way. If I continue to save as I go, you'll notice that the save option is save and checkpoint. So it'll create the checkpoints, and you'll notice that there's this auto saved as well. So as I've been going, it's been auto saving to make my life easier. It's nice to just be able to go back and say, no, I want to go back even earlier. And this checkpoint is just through the session. So if I don't save it locally, and if I didn't save it, I'd only have so many checkpoints to go back to. Now, because I am in the cloud, I'm going to stress this because I've had some issues with the cloud, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who's run into it, where you run stuff in the cloud. You can see here I'm running on free compute. Make sure that you stop running when you're done. Because if you're running in the cloud and you're not on a free tier, you're just going to be consuming cycles, and that would not be good. So when in doubt. Now I could also tell it direct compute, but I don't have it set up here. Are there any questions?
Everybody's quiet.
Leonid says that Azure Data Studio has notebook functionality for SQL. That's where it was.
Yeah.
So yes, this is Azure Notebooks. And as you have questions, like I said, you'll be able to go ahead and clone this and play with this on your own. I will post this link in Meetup so that way you have access to the slides, the whole project as well.
Yeah, so give a good starting point.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, with it being in public preview, like I said, the tough part is not using it for production because you don't know if those kernels are going to be there.
Right.
But if you're working with that, so how do you deal with poor data quality in data sets? It's a good question. Yeah, so about that. So what I end up having to do for the poor data quality is I'm usually looking to see things such as, okay, how many, that's where .info comes in handy. Because I'm constantly looking at data sets. I'm going to look to see how bad is this data set that I'm working with. Usually I look to see not a numbers to start, and it's okay and it's fine. Sometimes, yeah, data munching, there's just a lot of, you got to clean up the data. You got to look at it to see, do you have values in columns that don't belong there? I've seen that. I've seen CSV files that they have commas in their data and they don't actually use the quotes to escape. And so when you go to import it, it goes kaboom. Sometimes with those, you actually just have to try to import and then go back and clean as you go, which is awful. Some with the not a numbers, if you have a default value, you can do a is NA. So I could see, like, if it's not a number, go ahead and use this default value so I can go ahead and change the data that way. But yeah, you have to do, more often than not, you see poor data. Unfortunately, clean data is one of those, it's a rarity. But like I said, what I end up having to look at is where are the not a numbers, where are the nulls, where are the nils, depending on what kind of data set it came from. And then checking to see, is there an intuitive value? Oh yeah, it's so right on this. So he said that CSV files and text and Excel and many other formats always have a host of problems where it's column delimiters, column separators, invisible characters like null terminators, yeah, /0, and line breaks are in the middle of the actual data. Yeah, that stuff happens a lot. And like I said, that sometimes it's a matter of just trying to import it and go, okay, where did this blow up? If you really have to deal with that data set.
Failed on line 1,562.
Oh, it's going to be a long night in the text editor.
Let me do a binary search for where the problem is.
I've done it. I've seen those nights. Those are rough, but yeah. So there's only so much you can do to hope that your data is right, and then there's a lot of cleanup.
And when I got involved with machine learning a few years ago, it turned out like a data scientist, like the primary job is cleaning the data.
Mm-hmm.
Once you got it all clean, then there's a lot of cool tools you can throw at it. And the tools help you clean it too, but still you have to analyze it and make sense of it.
Yeah, I was on a panel last Friday for one of our local coding boot camps, and there's a company here that does a lot of AI and ML stuff. And they had asked about getting into AI, and they asked, what is the typical job of a data scientist? And I was listening to him just like, okay, where is he going to go with this? And he said, most of the time it's cleaning data. He's like, you don't need a PhD for these data science positions because you're spending more time cleaning the data than you are actually doing things like creating the presentation of them.
Right.
Like here, you're seeing when I was doing the graphs, I'm using pandas. Pandas is as common as can be for the Python side of things. So we use pandas to not only look at the data, but you can use pandas to clean the data. You can use pandas to create visualizations. The other libraries I like to use for visualizations are Seaborn, which is one of the ones I had in here with the ramen ratings. Yeah, XML XSD 1.1 to the rescue. Oh, yeah. But yeah, I like to use Seaborn and Matplotlib, which is what Pandas uses under the covers for some of its things. Plotly's another one of the Plotly's another one of the Python libraries, also for visualization. I think Seaborn though has done the nicest, and it's just because it doesn't look like the old like hand drawn or like the 8-bit drawings, or not like the like MATLAB. It's not that bad.
Right.
Seaborn makes it a lot nicer. Leonid says the technical term from a previous manager is for working with bad data is farkling.
Farkling.
I like that word.
That's more fun than the data wrangling.
Yeah, farkling.
Farkling.
To work with bad data is farkling.
And what's the breakdown of that farkling, I wonder?
Here, let's bring it over and see. Thankfully, it is a chain link.
Ah.
A synonym for hosed, possibly related to Yiddish. I can't pronounce that one. And for the Farkle family skits on Rowan and Martin's laughing. Oh, man.
Farkle data.
Yep.
I gotta be farkling tonight.
Yeah, I can't play games tonight. I'm too busy farkling. I
Boy,
like this.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at what I learn at these. Gonna be farkling.
Oh, goodness.
I gotta use this one. Ah, thanks for that technical tip.
Thank you, Leonid. Oh, that's awesome. So yeah, this is Azure Notebooks.
Yeah. Anything else, anybody?
Farkling is all about making dirty things clean.
You could go on and on with this.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
Oh well. Anybody else? Any other questions? Everybody's quiet tonight. Usually we have a lot of commentary.
I'm surprised to see it quiet.
Yeah.
But then again, how's the weather there?
It's raining.
So may not necessarily be outdoors either.
No. Yeah, well, generally it's nice, but we're in rainy season now, and there's tropical storms going by, so it rained most of the day today.
Yeah, that's why I messaged you earlier. We had thunderstorms here.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, the describe function, Cliff? Yeah. So what has Microsoft got planned for Azure Notebooks? I wish I would have more insight on that. That I don't have. I did tell you though I was going to show you the Lego notebook. So I'll show the Lego notebook as well. Yeah, what does Microsoft have for plan for Azure Notebooks? Probably to use Jupyter in other projects and not come back in here with that. Jupyter subscription with Jupyter on MS Azure, I have not compared those. Barker steps away, Farkling shows up. That's how that works. So there's a data set from Data Camp where they talk about working with the Legos. And I made sure I was going to tell you guys about this. I have not put this in the notebook, but if you want this in the notebook, I can put this in the project as well. But what's nice is, so they have a database from a place called Rebrickable, and has all sorts of CSVs, has a schema for us, which was nice. And so I was like, okay, let's bring this. So I want to bring this up because who just mentioned it? Cliff mentioned Panda's describe function. So I want to show you what this looks like. So if I go ahead, I'm going to read in my CSV file, because this was something I haven't done yet. I'm going to go ahead and explore colors. Okay. I'm going to add a cell in here. We're going to interrupt my normal story here. Sparkling. So I want to see the colors that's described. Right. Just to mention what Cliff was talking about. The describe function, or in this case, the describe function will give you a little bit more info.
Your audio got muted all of a sudden, Sarah.
Muted.
Oh, now it's okay. Not
Okay.
muted, but like muffled.
Like, okay. So yeah, Cliff had mentioned that he found the pandas describe to be useful, and so I wanted to show you. This is what describe looks like. So can you see the colors dot describe?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this gives you more insight as to, okay, there's a colors CSV that I read in. And this is kind of some breakdown as to, is it transparent, the name, the ID, some information about that. Describe is useful for understanding. I think it works better with numeric values than it does with actual text values. I don't know that this shows anything else for those values. Maybe sets will show it. Let me see if I run this part. And if I add a cell below this, then do sets.describe. I see there's not really much in the way of the sets data other than like the number of parts. Describe will get you some information to look at things as well. But what's nice is you can see like their theme trends and stuff like that. If you're ever looking to play with data and get some good exercises behind, look into Data Camp. Data Camp does have some free exercises with things like this one here, which was looking at 67 years of Lego. So it's a lot of fun. Restore my checkpoint on this guy. Revert to 448. Revert. There we go. That way all the things I did are now undone.
Very nice. Data camp.
Yep. They have R, they have Python, they have a few other things now. I haven't looked at their other things recently, but I can tell you for a fact from experience that Python and R are good tracks to learn. Even if you don't have much of, like if you have a solid programming language background and a foundational thing like C# or Java, you're fine for working with this. But if you have no programming language background, it's also good. As I went through Data Camp, I went through Coursera for some of the art courses, and the only limitation I ran into with Coursera is that there were some where you had peer reviews, and the course was done asynchronously, so you could enroll at any time. Well, if you're going through the course at a time where there's somebody not going through the course, then you are sitting and waiting for a peer review. So the Coursera courses for R were okay. but I liked the data camp ones a little more. The interactivity, the more relevant examples.
Yeah, we didn't. I took a Coursera course and it wasn't peer review, but it was. But we did it like along with one of the classes, and then we had a study group that we met in person every week.
Nice.
Andrew Ng's course.
Nice. Craig wants to know, is data camp like band camp but with
Well,
sparkling?
it's going to go downhill.
And Victor does make a good point that data camp is very good and that they have their discounts for their annual subscriptions. Right now they're running, apparently it's a 62% on their annual subscription, and they'll even donate one. So this offer is in 5 days.
Cool. All right. Anything else, anybody? Now we got to have a presentation on Farkling. Do you,